All right, everybody, we're live right out here at Riverside Terrace, aka 3rd Ward, y'all, as we getting ready to celebrate 100 years since Clarence Malone came out here and developed this land on the other side of Blodgett, which was called Riverside Terrace. But Houston annexed it later on and it became part of 3rd Ward. But let's give you a history on Mr. Clarence Malone. When he came out here and developed this land, it was mainly for the richer Jews, the upper class Jewish people, and also the upper class Italian people who could not move out there in revokes. So they decided to make their own little revokes out here in Riverside Terrace. And Mr. Clarence Malone, who started developing this area out here, and later on it started upgrading over on McGregor to Mr. Henry McGregor. Yes, he started all them big homes out there for the Jewish people to move out there in them big homes out there on McGregor, such as the Weingarten family, the Fingers family, and some of the Sackwitz family, some of the richer Jews who could not move out there in revokes. No, revokes had a exclusive deed restriction, whites only. That's why the Italians came in with the Jewish people who had the money to come out here and start their own luxury upper class citizenship of Houston, Texas, which was called Riverside Terrace. And Riverside Terrace went all the way from Blodgett all the way on back to OST. Yes, in 1952, Jack Caesar, who was a black man who came out here and moved in this area. Now, Mr. Jack Caesar was a well-rich black cattleman who had a lot of cattle. He wanted to move out here, let's say 28 years later in 1952. And the whites that lived out here, along with the Italians and the Jewish people, they did not want blacks to stay out here, and that's why they moved out here for their rich area neighborhood. They really didn't even want any poor white people living out here. Only people they wanted to live out here was the upper class white people who couldn't afford to live in revokes, and the Jewish people who could not move in revokes regardless of their money, and the Italians who could not move out here because of their money. It was that they had came out here and started their own exclusive neighborhood, and they called it Riverside Terrace. And when Mr. Jack Caesar came out here in 1952 to get his home out here, they rebelled. They went against him. They started bombing his house. They was trying to burn down his house. But Mr. Jack Caesar was a pioneer. He wanted to make a statement that money talk and bullshit walk. And they didn't want to hear that because it wasn't about the money, because they learned that from the whites that was out there in revokes. It was about the principles, that these are the guidelines that they wanted to follow. And that's the way it was. Plus, they had the Jim Crow law. The Jim Crow law was they had separate schools, separate water fountains, separate bathrooms, one for whites, one for color. Now, the ones that the Italians and the Jewish people, they did not have to use the colored restroom. They could use the white restroom. So was the Hispanic people. They was considered as foreigners. But we blacks was considered as Negroes. First we were colored people, then it was Negroes. And we were separated. But now, in 1952, Mr. Jack Caesar, which I say was a cattleman, had a lot of cattle. And you got to remember, Texas was all about cattle and oil, especially Houston. And when he refused to move, and they finally gave in to letting him stay out here, then it was always that Blodgett was part of the white area, which was the Jewish area. On the other side of Blodgett was considered as being part of 3rd Ward and being part of blacks. But then in 1952, after Mr. Jack Caesar came out here, then it took almost another, I would say another 3 to 4 years, and blacks could move out here but they would still have problems. But later on, 6 years later, 1958, blacks started moving out here. Why did blacks start moving out here? Because the Jewish people were moving out. Because they knew what was behind me was coming. And that's 288, as you see in the back of me. So all the Jewish people started moving out of the neighborhood. And then they started moving out there to Maryland. Because Joe Myers' son and the Myers family created a place out there for all the Jewish people to move out there to Braeswood. So they could give this area, which was the Riverside Terrace, they could turn it over to blacks. But then all the white folks did not want the blacks to move out here. But they couldn't move. They didn't have the money like the Jewish people had. So they stayed here until it was time for 288 to come buy them out. So they stayed here up until 1950, I would say in the early 60s, 1960, 61, most of the whites was moving out. And most of the blacks was moving in. And when they came out here, and the Jewish people had this Riverside Terrace, they only had one apartment out here, and that was a luxury apartment right here on the corner of Sophomore and Darling, what was called the Riverside Terrace. Then they had a luxury apartment on the other side of McGregor for all the upper young people who was going to college and was getting out of college and they wanted to be a single. They had another place they used to call the Bayou de Ville. All of those was upper class apartments that they had out here in Riverside Terrace. And Bayou de Ville was sitting on the banks of the Braes Bayou on McGregor. And you might as well say Darling, because Darling did end to Riverside. And when blacks came out here and started buying homes out here, we moved out here in 1959 and was still a few whites out here. All these apartments that you see down here on Sophomore was once big homes when we moved out here. And what they did, I'm not saying they did it because I have no proof. But most of the Jews, they knew they couldn't sell these big mansions that they had out here, so they started vacating the property, and next thing you know, the houses were burning down. And then after that, the next thing you know, they took the money and built an apartment complex for all the other blacks who wanted to come out here and stay but didn't have the money to buy a home. So they gave them the apartments out here. And one of the biggest apartments out here that they had for blacks was the Parkview Chateau that's on the corner of Prospect and Live Oak. Now that once home was considered as part of the Candy Mosler, which was a multi-millionaire that the Mosler family had. And it was there on Prospect and Live Oak. In fact, it was so big, and the lot was so big, it was there, one side of the house was Prospect, the other side of the house was Calumet. And then you also had Mr. Ben Tarr family. Ben Tarr family lived right there off of McGregor and Ardmore. Well, Ardmore was dead right into Ben Tarr's house. And later on, Ben Tarr and them took the house down, and next thing you know, you got the Embassy Apartments there. And then you had all these other big homes that were up and down Sophomore that you see. I would say from the 2300 block all the way to the 2500 block was mostly apartments. But now, as we get ready to celebrate the 100 years and also be able to celebrate blacks coming out here to Riverside Terrace, so much accomplished had to came because in 1963, blacks out here in Riverside Terrace got their own bank. And the bank was called, of course, Riverside Bank. And later on in the 80s, it changed the identity name to the Unity Bank. But it was the first black bank in the whole state of Texas. It was one of the first black banks in the whole South. It was right here in 3rd Ward. And it was called Riverside Bank, and it was on the corner of Blodgett and Live Oak. And what can you say about so much other things that happened here in 3rd Ward and so many other the Jewish people? Give you a good example. It was a Jewish guy named Dick Gottlieb Dick Godley had, which was a skating rink, which at first was a bowling alley. When blacks started moving out here, it was a bowling alley. Dick Godley promoted bowling. Dick Godley was one of the city councilmen here in the city of Houston before they started having districts. And when Dick Godley had that bowling alley right there on the corner of Sophomore and Sampson, after blacks started moving in here and blacks went into that much of bowling, then Don Roby took over that same building and made it a Palladium ballroom. And that's where he would have all these different people that would come in, like Jackie Wilson, James Brown, Temptation, Donna Ross and the Supreme, Gladys Knight and the Pips, you name them. If they were somebody, Otis Redding, if they were somebody in the black rhythm and blues music industry, Don Roby would book them here at his Palladium ballroom. And Don Roby owned the record company, so he was the first black to have his own record company and distributing company. And this is where he came at. And then what can you say about Mr. McHannon? That's right, Mr. McHannon, he was the first black in the whole South to have a saving loan, standard saving and loan, right there on the corner of Dowling and Wheeler, where he would loan money out to people. But during them days, people's word was they bond. It ain't like today. No. If people say they're gonna borrow money from you, they make sure they'll starve before they'll starve just to pay you your money. That's how valuable people's word was during them days. When Mr. McHannon used to loan out money at his standard saving and loan, which was located right there on the corner of Dowling and Wheeler. And then you also had a lot of black doctors, such as Dr. Bowie. Dr. Bowie also had so much influence over the Negro Hospital, which was in 1927, which it was in 3rd Ward. Like I said, it was in 3rd Ward, the original 3rd Ward. And then they moved Dr. Bowie and his staff worked out of the Negro Hospital, which later on, but it became Riverside. I say everything based out here in 3rd Ward on this side of town, if it meant anything, it was always Riverside. They even put an extension called Riverside Extension on the telephone line, Southwestern Bell, that you might call it today is 74. Okay, that 74 number means RI. RI means Riverside. And that's what the RI meant. But today, the same RI, since we don't use alphabets on our phone these days, you use numbers. Well, the 74 number is the alphabet of Riverside, which is RI. And what can you say about 3rd Ward and Riverside Terrace? And so much and how much it meant. In fact, in the early 60s, when blacks started moving out here, they was no longer calling it Riverside Terrace. No, blacks started calling it Sugar Hill. You know they had in California a Beverly Hills? Well, excuse me. But here in Riverside Terrace, blacks started calling this area Sugar Hill. Why they call it Sugar Hill? Because it was sweet. These big brick homes, these 2-story homes, and we didn't have that in 3rd Ward before blacks moved out here to Riverside Terrace. So these are the things that we're celebrating today, 100 years since 1924, and this is a new year, 2024, and we cannot forget about Riverside Terrace and how sweet it is. Our city councilman in District D, Carolyn Evans Shabar, she was raised up out here in this district, which was called Riverside Terrace. Remember I told you, anything on the other side of Logic was considered Riverside Terrace. And then when they started integrating here, there's so much good history here. When we start integrating here, and they made it mandatory, after Johnson signed the Civil Rights Bill in '64, it was mandatory It wasn't mandatory, but we could go to white schools. And we out here in Riverside Terrace, that's when I found out that we were separate from 3rd Ward. Because everybody who lived on the other side of Blodgett, which was considered as Riverside Terrace, where we at now, over here off of Sophomore, all of that was considered we could go to Senior Center High School, which is now Houston Community College today, right there off of Caroline and Holman. And everybody who lived on the other side of Blodgett going towards the CUNY home, all of those people, if they wanted to, they could go to Stephen F. Austin. But we, coming out of school in 67 and 66, we did not want to go with the white kids because all our transcript and all our lives, we had been brought up to be Jack Yates lines. So we stayed and graduated from Jack Yates. It wasn't mandatory for us to go to Senior Center High School. But that following year, in 1968, it was mandatory for all the kids in the 70s, especially in the 70s, that they had to go to Senior Center High School. And the kids over there, if they wasn't booked out at Yates, they would transfer and go over there to Stephen F. Austin. These are some of the things that we're celebrating here today. 100 years in this year. 100 years of Riverside Terrace. And it's so good to be here to share this experience and this history, this rich history of Riverside Terrace, aka 3rd Ward. You know, as we sit back here, and as I said, all of the Jewish people were moving out of here because they seen what's in the back of me. 288 was coming through. And George Myers, which is one of the sons of Mr. Myers, of the Myers family. You people know the Myers family because they own my land, and I did a history on my land. They started making room for the Jewish people to move and raise their family out there in Braeswood. And they had the school out here, was called Johnston School, which was on the corner of Cleburne and San Emmanuel. They left the school and turned it over to blacks. And the school became William E. Miller to help some of the load off of Jack Yates in 1957. And they took their school, Johnston School, and moved it out there to Marland, where the rest of the Jewish people was. And they kept the name of Johnston Junior High School. And all of that was part of 3rd Ward and Riverside Terrace. When they had Weingarten was also part of Riverside Terrace. And the way Mr. Weingarten had it set up, that everything was being able to, Weingarten on Alameda, all of that on the Alameda, and then across the street from William E. Miller, Miss Peggy McGregor, that's why the park is named Peggy Park. Peggy McGregor, who is the wife of Henry McGregor, and he donated all the land back out there by McGregor. That's why you got South McGregor, North McGregor, and McGregor Park. All that land was donated by Henry McGregor. And Henry McGregor sold a lot of land out here on the other side of McGregor. When they came out here and started this area, one of the biggest investors who invested in the land out here was Henry McGregor. And when he came out here and invested the land, he invested land for the Jewish people. That's why you see all the big mansions on McGregor, and on the back of McGregor, Rio Vista, and all the way back to OST. Because Mr. Henry McGregor bought that land and donated that street to be able to run on the side of the bayou, on both sides of the bayou. That's why you got a North McGregor and a South McGregor. All of that is the courtesy of Mr. Henry McGregor, who developed all that land out there, and then donated some of the land to the city so they could have a park which was called McGregor Park, which was exclusive for white folks only. And mainly McGregor Park was built for the Jewish people, and also for the white people that was moved already moved out there in the late 50s to South Park. That's who that park was for. It was not made for blacks. And during them days, like I said, they would have the Jim Crow law. What the Jim Crow law is the separation from whites and blacks. And Jewish people, Italian people, and even the Hispanic people, the Chinese people, all of those people was considered as foreigners. So they could use the white restaurants and could eat in the white restaurants and use the white bathroom and drink out of the white fountains, if they wanted to. But then you catch a lot of Hispanic people, especially the Hispanic people that lived out there on Canal and Navigation, what we call Second Ward. They seen how rude the white folks was with them. See, they could go use and drink out of the water fountain for buying if it ain't no white there. But if it's white there, they had to move back and let the white folks drink first. If it was a white going in the bathroom and they needed to use the toilet, they would have to let the white man use the toilet before they could use it. Now that's the way they treated the Hispanics. But now the Italians and the Jews, well, they had money. So the Italians, they had all the grocery stores out here in Riverside Terrace. The Jewish people, they had all the stores that was downtown, because when they used to have Jewish holiday, they had to stop it, because Jewish holiday was just like Christmas is today. Everything closed down. So the Jewish people said, no, let's don't celebrate our birthday, our day like the blacks do on Juneteenth. Let's open our stores and we'll have a private celebration of our Jewish holiday without losing money. And one thing about the Jewish people, when they open up a business, you can tell it's a Jewish business because they put a symbol, a star for a symbol, to let other Jewish people know that this is a Jewish establishment. And what would happen? They would get support from other Jews to come out here and patronize their store. And this is why we're doing 100 years of Third Ward being found in 1927. This is 100 years since Third Ward been out here, but it wasn't out here, it was called Riverside Terrace. And it was for whites only. And like I said about the Jewish people, they would come out here and put a symbol. And all the other upper class Jews would help this Jewish family get on their feet. And then they would pay them that money back. And they would help another Jewish family. That's how the Jewish people own 90% of downtown Houston business is concerned. But I'm so thankful, and thank you guys for another year. And we're going to do some more, because this is just the beginning of 2024 and Riverside Terrace and 100 years here. Thank you, Third Ward. Thank you, Miss Carolyn Evans Shabab. You're the great city council lady. I love you to death. Thank you for the proclamation I got last year before last. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate all the support you guys give us here on social media. Love you guys. Thank you. God bless you.